So I've been asked to talk a little bit about sort of how it is as a student nurse, and in particular the plan to get rid of the student bursaries next year in August 2017. So at this moment, most health professionals are covered under a bursary scheme for a couple of different vehicles, which covers our tuition fees and a little bit to live off, and that's means tested. What that means for, say, me personally, is it means that, for example, when I'm on placement and I'm doing things like night shifts and stuff like that, I don't have to work part-time for all those few weeks to supplement my income. It gives me enough to cover my rent and a little bit like that. Without that, I would struggle. I would struggle to do it. In addition, it has been argued, and I think there's validity to this, which is that there are certain groups of people who make up, sort of nursing students and midwives and so on, with families and with children and things like that. And again, the bursary allows them to sort of make do and get by until they've qualified. Give it a little bit of an idea of what we do when we're on placement for those of you who don't know. So, for example, I've just done a 12.5-hour day shift followed by a 12.5-hour night shift with, obviously a day gap in between. That's a bit zombie. And during that time, especially when we start thinking about wards and how busy they are and the sort of staffing issues they're having in some hospitals and areas like this. So although we're there to learn, we are also there and we are doing. So over those couple of days, I must have done something like 20 commodes. I've helped bathe at least 5 or 6 people, I think. They were short of porters one day, so I was wheeling to them from X-ray and CT and things like this. So the point being, when we're there, we do learn, but we also work, and we work very hard. And the bursary is some sort of recompense for that, almost, to some extent, you could argue. It'll be about 50p an hour when you work out at the end of it. And out of our course, 50% of our time is spent in hospital, is spent working, and so on. There have been arguments, or people who have questioned whether, for example, you have to take out a student loan if you want to do a law degree. At the moment, you don't if you're a nurse or a paramedic or whatever. One thing I would argue against the sort of the difference between those, one is that we are having to work 50% of our time on wards doing things, that kind of thing. We are actually directly taking part in patient care, and the other is that we are studying for a particular profession, a particular occupation that will most likely be in the NHS. For me, it certainly will be if it still exists in 3 years' time. And whereas other courses, it can lead into a number of things. I'm training to be a nurse. I'm going to be a nurse, and that's it. And I'm going to be doing that, for everyone. Let's say for the NHS. And at this moment in time, although I'm sure it will change in time, you don't have to pay if you want to train to be a fireman. You don't have to pay if you want to be a policeman. So why should paramedics have to pay, that kind of thing? The kind of numbers we're talking about, if you're inside London, you talk about £61,000 debt if you take on the student loan. For outside of London, you're talking about 50,000, so you've got about 30-something thousand to cover your tuition fees, and then living costs on top of that, and obviously that would be means tested and so on. A little bit of historical context. It'll be the first time I've recently sort of working on an essay for this. First time in the history of this country that nurses have had to pay en masse to do their training. Obviously there'll be some little individual pockets over the history of the 100 years, but basically to learn to be a nurse is that next year will be the first time we've had to pay. And I would question whether that's a country we want to be in, one that makes us do that, really. I don't think it's very British myself, but there we go. And also I would argue, I understand there's a much bigger thing going on in the NHS, and bursaries are just one small part of it, and they are. But they form part of it, and they're part of that ethos, which is to, partly move the costs into the private sector or onto the personal individual rather than on the state, and also to sort of demotivate and to punish those who are working as part of the welfare state, and the result being we're tired because we're working extra, because we're paying off our student loans when we're qualified and so on. We're a little bit stressed about things maybe we're not able to campaign, for example, because we've got this debt hanging over us, and we've just got to concentrate on getting through work and not getting in trouble, and which means it'll help that whole process of the NHS failing so they can sell it off. Call me a sceptic, but that's how it looks to me. There's been a lot of people speaking out lately about it, from like the RCN, from a number of figureheads, NHS employees and so on. And one of the things they have pointed out is there is generally a consensus that it will disproportionately affect women, especially women and children. Something, bearing in mind, I think think it's like 70-something% of the NHS are female. It's a little bit unfair, and that's a little bit harsh, quite frankly, if you ask me. And also, when we get on to, I mean, sort of the staff shortages and so on, how, you're right, there aren't enough trainees for a lot of health professional courses. There aren't enough nurses going through the system. I would argue, make more bursaries available, make more places available, spend the money, and then we'll have them come out. Obviously they'll argue something else, there's no money, etc. What will happen when the student loan, well, what is a lot of people perceive, certainly those in the bursary or bus campaign perceive, what will happen when it moves to the student loan system from the bursary system is that, one, will they fill the spaces, and two, the quality of who's taken up those places. So my cohort, and my colleague here, Luke's as well, is made up, there's about 80 of us in the cohort, of which I would say 60 roughly, I haven't actually counted the numbers, the heads, but about 60 or so are either in the sort of over 25 bracket or on the second degree bracket as well, form part of that. So I already have a degree, I already have a student loan, and I'm paying that off. I do not want to top that up. I want to, the interest is more than I earn, more than I pay off, so it's kind of ridiculous. And what you will potentially get is it's going to put off a lot of us second degrees, it's going to put off a lot of older people, and you're going to be filling. So if you assume the ones who got in because they were the best, and you're now discounting quite a large proportion of those because they don't want to do it or they can't afford to do it, you're going to be bringing in a number of people, some of which will be fantastic nurses, some of which perhaps maybe aren't the best of the crop. That would be a risk as well. So when years done, when I'm qualified and people are coming through and they've perhaps not had the support they need, or they're not the right people, or it wasn't the right time in their life for it, that's going to affect patient care, and that's going to affect the working environment and so on. I think that's kind of all I wanted to talk about. That's all right. Is that cool? Thank you. Thank you very much.